Good evening, everybody. Hello and welcome to another Wednesday night Bible study here at Faith Baptist Church. I'm so glad to have you guys this evening. Tonight we're going to be in 1 Samuel 15. I'm looking forward to it. We're studying the continuation of the pitfalls of a prideful king. We're going to be looking at King Saul and the beginnings of the mistakes he makes. We're going to do half the lesson this week and half the lesson last week because it is quite a lot to break down. And I want to go through all of it with you because I think it'll be helpful to you. I would ask you to be in prayer for one another this evening. Good evening, Rhonda. Good to see your name popping up. Let me just double check on that's not what I wanted, the group me for the church, and see about some updates that we had, or prayer requests. Miss Christie, I saw earlier this week, updated us on Tacey was going to be having her driving test, had her driving test, passed it with flying colors, as we were all sure she was going to. But so very grateful that she finally got able to take it. Hey, thank you so much for that like. It's over here and up here. I appreciate you. Let me see. We have an update on Ryan's father, RD. They said they had to double up on his beta blockers. This is in accordance to his heart issues that he was having. Good evening, Sylvia, Ryan, and Miss Christie. Good to see all of y'all. They had to double up on his, and thank you so much for the like on the stream as well. I appreciate that. On his beta blockers while they were on vacation because he couldn't keep his blood pressure down. Well, it's vacation, right? My blood pressure would be up with all that excitement and fun, too. It was topping out at, 190 over 118. Wow. However, the medication has kept it down for the most part. It's been around 140 over 100. So that's better. The surgery is scheduled for September 3rd at noon. So you guys continuously be in prayer for RD for all these things. We very much appreciate it. If you guys have something that you'd like for me to read out for everybody, be sure to leave a comment on this live stream. While we're still live, I'll do my best to read it for everybody.
What about live?
You have one?
Pray for Emma. She has sun poisoning, and they're still in Florida.
Okay. Amanda just, I don't know how many of you guys could hear that, but Amanda just asked prayer for Emma. That's my little cousin, Emma Brooks, who's in Florida still, right? And said that she had sun poisoning. I have questions. What's sun poisoning?
Where you get such a bad sunburn. She had to go to the hospital. She's gotten such a bad sunburn that she's basically got sun poisoning from it. Her legs are swollen and it's bad. Yeah.
Well,
and they have to drive home from Florida.
Thank you.
So.
Wow.
Yeah.
I had no idea. So she's got sun poisoning from being out in the sun so much. It tracks, knowing my family. Tiffany and them love to be out on the beach. But I didn't know I've never heard of sun poisoning. That's awful. I've
had it once.
I have more questions afterwards.
Okay.
Okay, so like I said, if you guys have prayer requests, leave a comment. I'll do my best to read it for everybody. So let's go ahead and jump over to our Bible study. If you guys have a comment, something you want me to pray for, don't feel like, we're past that moment, still leave a comment. I'll still read it for everybody. As a matter of fact, if you guys have questions about anything, leave a comment and I'll address it. That's kind of the fun of these Wednesday night online things, is that I can interact with you guys from wherever you are. You've been reading your Bible throughout the week, something you read you didn't understand, you want to ask me a question about it, please do so. You got a question about something I'm talking about or something I talked about on Sunday, please leave a comment. I would love to talk to you guys about it. But for right now, we're going to jump over to our Bible study. All right, so like I said, we're in 1 Samuel 15 this evening. And it's an interesting one because it is where most people start talking about... Sorry, my back is still killing me. Where most people start talking about Saul's decline, is pridefulness taking over and him being rejected as king over Israel. But we know that has been going on for a few chapters now because we've been studying it. And in 1 Samuel chapter 15, we're going to start in verse 1. Miss Julie Andrews reminds us to start at the very beginning. A very good place to start. Verse 1 says, Samuel also said unto Saul, The Lord sent me to anoint thee to be king over his people and over Israel. Now therefore hearken thou unto the voice of the word of the Lord. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, I remember that which Amalek did to Israel, how he laid wait for him in the way when he came up from Egypt. Now go and smite Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have, and spare them not, but slay both man and woman, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and ass. Amanda said that Emma has sun poisoning, and was explaining to me a little bit about what sun poisoning is. When you've been out in the sun too much and the sunburn becomes quite intense and she's swelled up, and she's in the hospital right now?
She's out of the hospital, but she had to go to the hospital.
Okay, that was going to be part of my question later, by the way. She's out of the hospital, but she's going to have to go back to the doctor. Is that what you just said?
I think she's just trying to do what the doctor said.
Oh, got you. Okay. So she's out of the hospital. He did have to go to the hospital for it, though. And is still recovering, I'd imagine. So I'll just be in prayer for Emma for the sun poisoning. Yeah, so these first 3 verses in chapter 15, it deals with Saul's decision to defy the Lord. Now, he's done that a couple of times already, we've read about. But we're going to dive in a little further into the mindset. How did all this happen? And how can we avoid the same traps that Saul fell into? So we look at these first few verses and we see God's message to Saul. So he sent this message to his anointed king. And in verse 1 he said, The Lord sent me to anoint thee. So as Samuel is speaking to King Saul here, he noticed possibly an air of, you're welcome, an air of pridefulness in his demeanor, and wanted to snuff it out. As you read through here, in verse 1 he's talking, but he doesn't say, Thus saith the Lord, quoting what God said, until verse 2. So verse 1 is all Samuel, him talking to Saul. So he's reminding him here that it was God that anointed him to be king in the first place. And he's using this reminder, he's reminding the king of his roots, where he came from. It's important to remember your roots. It's important to remember where you came from. We ought to have confidence in ourselves, but that confidence can be overdone. You can get to a point where you think you're better than everybody else, you know better than everybody else, you don't need advisors, people should just do everything you say, and that can be a very dangerous place to get to in your mind. And that's the place that we start to see Saul getting to. I don't think he was an angry, aggressive king, but I think he was getting to the point where he was trusting in his own knowledge and his own experiences more than what the Lord was telling him. And Samuel's kind of picking up on that. So he's reminding him that it was the Lord who anointed this guy in the first place. He's kind of reminding him that he was just a poor young man looking for his dad's donkeys. And that was the guy that God chose. Now, Saul didn't think very much of himself back then. And we know that there were tribes or groups of people in Israel that also didn't think very much of him. This guy's not a king. He doesn't know anything about being a king. Why should we follow him? And so that doubt that he had in himself being resonated by other people really caused him to doubt himself. And when he started to have some victories and he started to gain some respect, he no longer doubted himself, but then it starts to go too far. So God here reminding him, it's not the, boisterous, puffed out chested king that I chose. It was that poor young man looking for his father's donkeys that I chose. We so often in our own lives, as we grow, we become more confident in ourselves, and this is a good thing. But we need to be careful that our confidence comes from the Lord. that it comes from what he thinks of us, and it doesn't come from the wealth that we've been able to collect over time, or that it doesn't come from our own personal or professional successes. Because as we grow, as we become more successful, as we develop in our finances, we begin to trust in these things. I don't have to worry so much because my money will take care of me. And it's smart to have some money put back. We have money put back a little bit. Just trying to be smart like you ought to be, wise and responsible. But the truth of the matter is that you can't trust in that money, because what our experience at least has been, it will vanish. Murphy's Law. Murphy will come knocking on your door, take every dime of that. Flat tires and things in the house going out. Need to replace that washer, or the refrigerator went out. All kinds of stuff. So you can never trust in your money. It may just up and vanish one day. You can't really trust in your own personal strength or your own wisdom, because there are so many things we haven't experienced and we don't know how to tackle. It's important that our confidence comes from the Lord and what he thinks of us, rather than all these other things. This is the pitfall that Saul is falling into. That's why we're talking about it. So it says in 2 Corinthians 10:17, "But he that glorieth, let him glory in the Lord." And that's an important thing to remember. If we're going to be confident in something, it should be in the things of God, what God has to say about us. "For not he," it says in verse 18 of 2 Corinthians 10, "For not he that commendeth himself is approved, but whom the Lord commendeth." And so that's very important to understand as well. If he's going to glory, let him glory in the Lord, because it's not the person that commends himself. It's not that self-confidence that makes you approved and ready to take on the world. It's the Lord's commendation. It's the Lord's approval that means that you're ready to take on the world. So Saul is reminding Samuel of all of these things, trying to get his mind and his heart back to the place it ought to be. But then in verse 2, like I said, he starts to give this message directly from the Lord. And one of the things that the Lord mentions that we read in verse 2 is where he says, "I remember that which Amalek did." Now, the people of Amalek, they go all the way back to the time of Moses and the wanderings in the wilderness as they're trying to get to the promised land. And so what he's talking about here with the Amalekites and Amalek in verse, I believe it was 2. Yeah. There in verse 2 is actually a reference to Exodus chapter 17. So I wanted to read that for you real quick, because it's a really cool story, and it'll give you some context as to why this is happening to the Amalekites and what God is talking about. Thank you so much, Summer. I appreciate that like. So in Exodus 17, we're going to start reading in verse 8. It says, so like I said, this is Moses, the wandering in the wilderness. We're just past the water and the rock. You can see there toward the top. And then here in verse 8, it says, "Then came Amalek and fought with Israel in Rephidim." Now you can look in your notes in the back of your Bible and see where Rephidim is. It's not in Israel. It's in that area as they're journeying from Egypt to Israel. So they fought with Israel in Rephidim, and Moses said unto Joshua, "Choose us out men and go out and fight with Amalek." Now, that's a pretty bold thing to say, because, like I said, they didn't have a trained army, right? They didn't have seasoned warriors like Saul is dealing with in our passage in 1 Samuel 15. Moses is dealing with men that just know how to survive. And so he's gathering the men together to go out and fight with Amalek. And he says, "Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in mine hand." I bet you didn't know the Bible actually called it the rod of God. And it does. So Joshua did as Moses had said to him and fought with Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. That's a brother. That some of these names in the Bible, these parents just were not nice. Man's name is Hur. You, girls. No, not her. Her. You got to say it with that accent, you know. You got to get down there. His name is Her. Goodness gracious, that's awful. Anyway, evidently it didn't trouble him too much. He's standing up there with Moses and Aaron. They went up to the top of the hill, and it came to pass when Moses held up his hand that Israel prevailed. And when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. And as somebody who leads music every single Sunday, I can tell you, you can only do this for so long. But Moses' hands were heavy. All that muscle he had in there. Yeah, Moses was beefy, baby. His hands were heavy, and they took a stone and put under him, sort of like a cushion to keep his hand up. And he sat thereon, sort of resting himself, and Aaron and Hur stayed up his hands, the one on the one side and the other on the other side, and his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. So this is pretty cool. And Joshua, because they held up his hands, Joshua discomfited Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. The Lord said unto Moses, write this for a memorial in a book, and rehearse it in the ears of Joshua, for I will, and here it is, utterly put out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. Now that's pretty cool, because it's exactly what we're referencing all the way back here in 1 Samuel 15. And then in verse 15 of Exodus 17 here, it says, Moses built an altar and called the name of it Jehovah Nissi. Jehovah Nissi is another name of God. We get many of these names throughout the Old Testament, and they teach us something about the Lord. Now, let me see if I can get back to our passage pretty quickly. Hey, I did. So the phrase Jehovah Nissi means Jehovah or God is my banner. That's what the phrase means. So God is reminding both Saul and all of Israel of a time when Israel was nothing more than a nation of slaves fighting for their right to exist. But it was never more powerful than that moment. And because their strength came from the Lord, their faith in the Lord, they were never so strong as they were when they leaned upon the Lord. You know, they couldn't wait to get out of that wilderness. They couldn't wait to get to a place where they'd have a home, where they'd have their own vineyards and their own sheep and animals, where they could live like normal people. How tired they were of wandering the wilderness and eating the same thing day in and day out. But that's where we get our best, coolest, and most remembered stories, is from that place in the wilderness. The place they couldn't wait to leave, that was where their best stories came from. That was where we get the story of the water coming out of the rock. We get that in the wilderness. You don't get that in the promised land. That's a wilderness story. The story of manna. They didn't fall from heaven. It grew with the dew each morning. And it was just there for them to harvest what they needed for each day. The story of being fed being fed ravens and so forth as they needed meat. All of these miraculous things and the miraculous winds that they had, meeting with God on top of Sinai, the bitter water turning sweet. All of these things took place after they left Egypt and entered into that wilderness and wandered in that wilderness for 40 years. Some of the best stories come from the wilderness. And you might be in a time in your life tonight where you feel like you can't wait to get past this moment in life and get to a place where you have a more secure financial situation, where you have a better home, where you have a better opportunity, a better job, and you just can't wait to get past this wilderness part of your life and enter into that promised land, the promises that you feel like God made to you throughout your life. But I'm telling you right now, you're going to look back on these moments in life, the struggles and the hardships, and you're going to see how God was with you through these things, took care of you, and all of your best stories will be from these wilderness moments. Don't rush them along. Don't throw yourself past them. Let yourself see the Lord in these things and enjoy them. That's what God is trying to get Saul to see here. It's not the well-established king that God is interested in. It's the poor young man looking for his father's donkeys. So he says, I remember that which Amalek did. He says in verse 3 that he is to utterly destroy all they have. He mentions destroying every animal that they had. He mentions destroying, as we quote it exactly here, man and woman, infant and suckling. Now, when God told Saul to destroy Amalek, he told him to destroy them utterly so that no one and nothing was left standing. And this can seem incredibly harsh when we put it in the light of punishment for something like God is quoting. And something even on top of that happened hundreds of years ago. But these Amalekites would continue to destroy innocent Israelites by the hundreds for many generations. And as a matter of fact, because of Saul's sort of incomplete following of the instructions here, the Amalekites continue to plague Israel. We read about the Amalekites being a plague to Israel even in the days of David. They continue to plague Israel their entire existence, their entire time. Let's also remember that these are a group of people that worship a god called Molech. Now, if you don't know about Molech worshippers, Molech worshippers were required by the god Molech to offer their babies in the fires of Molech. They were literally burning their babies alive in the name of this false god, Molech. Now, you can mess with people to a certain degree, but God has very little patience when it comes to messing with children, messing with babies, infants, and kids. And he has very little patience for that sort of a thing. As a matter of fact, in the New Testament, it says it was for those that bother the little ones, would be better for a man to hang a millstone about his neck and cast himself into the sea than to offend one of these little ones. Okay. So that takes us through the first few verses. But when we're looking at God and his destruction of these people utterly and incredibly, you might say, Pastor, you say that about him being cautious of the children, yet he just told Saul to utterly destroy the infants and the children. That is because these particular children, these particular infants were going to grow up to become grown men and women who would continue to sacrifice babies in the name of Molech and would continue to murder innocent Israelites. So we're putting an end to the senseless violence the only way possible. You might not agree with this here. You might say, no, you can't, because they'd maybe have a chance to change in the future. You're forgetting we're talking about God. God knows the end from the beginning. He knows that these people were never going to change no matter what chance they were given. He's not like us. If I decided to go end somebody because I didn't think that they'd have a chance to change in the future, that would be wrong, because I don't know the potential that person has to be a force for good in this world. I have no right to that. That's not my choice. But if we're talking about a decision that God made, he's all-knowing. And that makes it a very different thing. Because he's all-knowing, he has the ability to determine what the best outcome will be, what the best choice is. We don't understand it. Of course we don't, because we're not all-knowing like he is. Our God is not cruel, nor is he unnecessarily violent. False gods like Molech were cruel. But our God, though capable of great and terrible things, is merciful and compassionate, and would not have done something like this unless it was absolutely necessary, which it was. So it brings us to the next section of our story. Check my time real quick here. Oh, okay. In verse 4, it says, "And Saul gathered the people together and numbered them in Telaim, 200,000 footmen and 10,000 men of Judah. And Saul came to a city of Amalek and laid in wait in the valley. And Saul said unto the Kenites, Go depart, get you down from among the Amalekites, lest I destroy you with them. For you showed kindness to all the children of Israel when they came up out of Egypt. So the Kenites departed from among the Amalekites." So a few things I want to talk about in that particular passage. In verse 4, it talked about Saul gathering the people together, and it gives us the number of how many footmen and different kinds of warriors there were there. But Saul in Telaim numbers them. God's king numbering their people, numbering their forces, has been seen a few times in Scripture as doubting God. It has more to do with relying on your numbers than it is about relying on the Lord. And it's sort of like what David did in 2 Samuel 24. He numbered the people as sort of like a census there, and God considered that to be doubting the Lord and his ability to take care of David and the people. For example, also before this, with Gideon. Gideon had the number of troops that he thought was necessary to win against his oppressors, the Midianites. And as he's preparing this army by the thousands for these Midianites, he thought this is a force that can contend with their forces. But God didn't want Gideon, like David would later, and like Saul here, he doesn't want God's people relying on their own strength for victory. So he whittled that number down to 300 guys. And Gideon had to go into battle still, but just with 300 guys. And God still gave him the victory. You see, God's not interested in your numbers, folks. We always think we need more, don't we? Especially like if you're trying to run a business or you're trying to be successful in some sort of a way, we think we need bigger numbers before we can do anything that matters, before we can have an impact on people or on this world, or if we want to do anything that matters in life, we got to have bigger numbers. And that's just not the case. We can do things impactful, things that will matter, things that will last right now. You don't have to wait for bigger and better. You know, a lot of times if I get discouraged about my church and the way things are going for me, because it took some turns I wasn't expecting, I always have to remind myself of this. The work that I do is still important, just like I'm sure the work that you do is very important, regardless of where you do it at, or, you know, the results that you can see with your own eyes. Because so many times you have an impact that you don't realize. Or if you get up and try to have an impact and you can't see it, don't get discouraged and sit down. Keep trying. Keep making that thing work. Because we have a bigger impact than we realize. In verse 6, he's told to get you down from among the Amalekites. I'm sorry, I just want to say this. King Saul was becoming too dependent on his own strength and his own forces, just like we become too dependent on our own numbers as well. The number of followers on Twitter or Instagram tell us how popular we are. And the amount of money we have in the bank tells us how powerful we are. But the only thing that truly matters is how much we trust the Lord and how well we obey him. That determines how much of a force you're going to be in life. A force for positive change and a force for impacting people's lives. A force that will be remembered for many, many years to come. But he's told, get you down from the Amalekites. Get you down. I'm sorry, he's not told. It's the Kenites. The Kenites are told, get you down from among the Amalekites. So Saul was told to utterly destroy, right, all of the Amalekites. But he chose to show mercy on these Kenites who were among the Amalekites. They considered themselves to be Amalekites. Everybody considered them to be Amalekites. So he's among these Amalekites, and he's about to destroy them, but he gives these Kenites a chance to leave first, because these are Saul's words and not God's. They showed kindness to Israel when the rest of the Amalekites were getting ready for war. And the thing about this is, what's important to remember is that God never shows any displeasure with Saul about this. So when he allows the Kenites to go, God never sends Samuel. He never gets enraged. He never denounces him as being king. God never displays any displeasure with Samuel allowing the Kenites to depart, to leave. This tells us something important, because this seems like cruelty from God, but Saul was commanded by God to smite these Amalekites completely. Nobody left alive. And to this point in verse 7, that's exactly what he's done. But he had every right also to show compassion. I'm sorry, verse 6. He had every right to show compassion despite the fact that God never expressly said so. He had the right and the ability to show compassion, even though God didn't expressly tell him he could show compassion. God was never upset with this. He was okay with this. And at the same thing, folks, is true for us as well. We can be as harsh as we want to be. We want to pick up the Bible and we want to wave it around, and we want to talk about how evil people are. We want to talk about how evil it is to be this or to be that. Or we want to talk about how terrible it is for people to support this or to support that. And we want to be that kind of a Christian. Biblically, you have every right to do that. However, Jude 22 and 23 talks about two different groups of people. Some having compassion, making a difference. Others, it talks about taking a very different approach, hating the garment spotted by the flesh. But if you're going to make a difference, you're going to have to be the kind of person that has compassion. Now, you have technically done God's work if you go the other route with it, but you will not be as effective. You will not be as efficient. You will not cause as great a change. You will not have as much of a difference being made unless you choose to express the compassion of Christ instead of just his wrath. People need to know that God is loving and merciful and forgiving, and not just angry towards our sins. You think people don't know that they have flaws? They know they have flaws. It's not hard to convince a person of that. When we come across and try to convince them of their flaws, we just come across as pious and they don't want anything to do with it. You think they're rejecting the gospel, and they're not. The fact of the matter is they're rejecting what they perceive as your hypocrisy and piety. That's what they're rejecting. They know they've got flaws. They know they're imperfect, but they know we're all imperfect. And what they need more than to be shouted at for every mistake they've made is to know that there's a God out there that forgives them for every mistake they've made. Because I tell you this, most people don't know that kind of forgiveness in their life. Most people don't know that kind of compassion and mercy and understanding. They don't. And I'll tell you what's even more sad is a lot of these kids coming out of Christian homes, coming out of Christian schools, coming out of these churches, they don't know that kind of compassion either. They don't know the compassion of Christ, even though they've been made to memorize whole chapters of the Bible. Because we'll hop from the verses that teach us about hope and encouragement, and we'll memorize the 10 Commandments. We'll memorize the law of God. Well, the law is great, but the law won't save you. That's not what they need to know about. What they need to know about is of a loving, merciful God. Get them to the point of salvation. Then we can teach them in even greater detail about all the law that we've been forgiven for. The more I learn about how much God forgave me for, the more I appreciate Him for it. But I couldn't start there. You've got to start with the simplicity of the gospel. I got off track there. Some having compassion making a difference. You can choose to be vengeful and wrathful about it, but you won't make as big a difference. Saul, in this moment, in verse 6, chose to show some compassion to these Kenites, and God did not dishonor that. I think He was pleased with that. But then we do come down here to verse 7. And in verse 7, check my time again real quick. Okay. In verse 7, it says, Saul smote the Amalekites from Havilah until thou comest to Shur. That is over against Egypt. And he took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive, and utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. But Saul and the people spared Agag and the best of the sheep, and of the oxen, and of the fatlings, and of the lambs, and of all that was good, and would not utterly destroy them. But everything that was vile and refuse, that they destroyed utterly. So we've come to this point now in the story where we see Saul attacking the Amalekites. And in verse 7, like I said before, to this point, Saul had not disobeyed God's command. What he was told to do is exactly what he had done. This phrase from Havilah to Shur, I'm not sure I'm saying that first one correctly, but evidently it's a figure of speech. It's a bit like our phrase, up one side and down the other. That, he whooped up on that boy up one side and down the other. Sometimes you watch a boxing match or what's it called? MMA fights? I don't watch the MMA fights, and really they don't box anymore. Except for that staged thing that they did last year or whatever it was. But you've maybe heard that phrase, beat him up one side and down the other. That's kind of their phrase. From Havilah to Shur is because Havilah was near the sea and Shur was in the desert near Egypt. So he's basically saying from the water to the desert, drug them from one side of this country to the other, whooping up on them. It's basically what that phrase means. So it's one thing to read about God working in the lives of people like Abraham and Moses and Joshua, giving them these incredible wins. We read about Abraham going in there and rescuing Lot, and what an incredible battle that must have been. And I'd love to see, like, these people that did The Chosen, I'd love to see an Old Testament series on that same sort of thing. That'd be awesome. I'd love to see Abraham going in there and rescuing Lot. That'd be such a tremendous episode. I'd love to see like Moses, battling these Amalekites, just trying to survive. I'd love to see Joshua as he's trying to reclaim the promised land for his people, and all of these battles that he fought and just miraculously and incredibly won. I'd love to see these things. I'd love to see God work through Saul and David and Solomon. But it's one thing to read about God working in these people's lives, and it's another thing entirely to watch Him work in your own life. Can I tell you something this evening? God is at work in your life. We just don't chronicle it right. God's been at work. Thank you. We just don't always see it like we should. What's the name of that preacher who had all those children's homes and so forth, orphanages? With the biography that's in our bedroom.
Yeah, it's not Spurgeon.
No, it's not Spurgeon.
You ask me this all the time.
I can't. If you one of you guys, huh?
Mueller. Is it Mueller?
George Mueller?
Yeah. No,
I don't.
that's not George.
I don't think that sounds right. If you guys know who I'm talking about, leave a comment and let us know. But there's a story about how they were out of food and they were out of milk and everything to give the kids to feed them their breakfast. And so he comes in to the woman who was running the place, and he says, we're going to kneel down and pray. And they kneel down and they pray, and evidently a few minutes later there's a knock at the door. And he opens the door, and it says that there was a cart of bread that had just crashed as he was trying to make a delivery. And there was a cart full of bread that was going to go bad because nobody could get to it in time, and wondered if he could use it. And so they had food to eat, and they go in there and they give the kids this bread, and then a few minutes later there's another knock at the door, and the same thing, but with milk, all this milk from this cart that had, crashed on the side of the road, and they wondered if the orphanage could use it because it was just going to go bad otherwise, and then they had milk to give the kids as well. We don't chronicle those stories. Those things happen for us, but we don't chronicle them. We don't keep track of them. Because what we would see is a time when we would say, well, God hadn't provided for us to buy food.
It was Mueller.
It was Mueller. George Mueller?
Yeah.
Okay, it was George Mueller. You can look that story up for yourself. We would chronicle that as a time where our baking business really took a hit because we lost an entire truckload of bread. We'd mark that as a bad day because the dairy farm that we worked at took a big hit. We lost a truckload of milk. And it's incredible, we find ways to turn blessings into curses. God is at work, folks. But we want him to work the way we want him to work, in the place we want him to work at the time we want him to work at. And when it doesn't do what we want it to do, we just call the whole thing off, and it doesn't matter what he does. God doesn't work for you, by the way. He's not your magic genie. You don't pick up your Bible and rub the side of your Bible and say, I wish for a new car. That's not how it works. God doesn't work for you. You work for the Lord.
Sure.
Don't get it turned around. God is at work for us. And these incredible victories we read about, like we just saw with Saul, he can give us these same kind of wins. Incredible things. And he's doing it all the time. You just got to take the time to slow down and see it. God didn't work at your pace. He works at his. You're going to tell the master creator of heaven and earth, you got to be at work at 9 o'clock and you don't have time? Doesn't that sound ridiculous to you? It sounds a little ridiculous to me. If the President of the United States was going to land his helicopter in your front yard and ask you for something, would you stop and go, I'm sorry, Mr. President, I've got to be at work in 5 minutes? No, you would not. You can think everything you want to about the President of the United States. You can be one of these huffy guys that goes, well, I don't care for the President. He showed up here. I'd tell him what he'd think. No, you would not. I don't care if you're a Democrat talking about a Republican or a Republican talking about a Democrat. You would not. You would take the time to hear what he had to say.
Sure.
How much more for God? For a president that you may or may not even care for. This one or the one before. We would, if we're being honest with ourselves, take the time to listen. How much more for the God that you worship, the maker of heaven and earth? Something to consider. Well, that is all the time we have for this evening. We made it through 9 verses. I'm so proud of us tonight. Next week, I have got to correct the grammar on these notes. Next week, we're going to pick up in verse 10, and it's going to be a good lesson. You guys aren't going to want to miss this. We're getting into the debate between Saul and Samuel, and about Saul's decisions to spare these things, and Samuel coming with the judgment of the Lord. And you're going to see a reflection of modern thinking in Saul, which we can easily correct by hearing what Samuel had to say, and it's profound. So I hope you don't miss that, but it's a tremendous thing. Did we make it through 9 verses?
I don't know.
We didn't. We made it to 7 because we read 9, where Saul spared Agag. That's the town that he was sent to, utterly destroy, and he destroyed all the bad things and kept all the good things. So, like we talked about the Kenites, he didn't retaliate against Saul for the Kenites, but for this he does, because it's self-serving. It's mercy that's self-serving. It contradicted the very purpose of the attack in the first place. It's meant to be a punishment, not to serve Saul and his people. Our actions can't be self-serving. They can't make our own interests a priority while helping out someone else becomes a fortunate side effect. Our desire cannot be to make life easier for ourselves, regardless of who gets stepped on in the process. And that's exactly what Saul did here. And then next week, like I said, we're going to talk about all of the different things that happen with Saul and Samuel, the things they talk about, and the profound statement that Samuel makes in the midst of this, and his fate through it all. So chapter 15 deals with this. We see Saul and his decline. And then in chapter 16, we see the new king, the next king, being anointed by God, because Saul is rejected and the next king is picked by God. And then in chapter 17, does anybody know what 1 Samuel 17 is?
Oh, is it Samson?
No. No. Honey, who comes after Saul? Chapter 17 is David and Goliath. So we're coming up on a really fun part of these stories. You may think you know that story. You might not know it as well as you think you do. So we're going to dive in a little heavier than I do for a sermon on Sunday mornings. I want you guys to be sure to check it out because it's going to be a fun one. We'll be back Sunday morning for our Cahoots game. You guys that watch online, please feel free to join in on us. I know there's a delay and you might not get as many points as everybody else, but it's fun to play along with us while things are going. So we'll have Cahoots on Sunday. We'll have our Children's Sunday this Sunday, where I'm going to do a junior church out here with the adults, and it's going to be a good time. So you guys who have kids, live in the area, be sure to stop by with your kids. Even if you don't have kids, stop by. I'm handing out candy. I'm a diabetic. I can't have candy. We'll have candy for you too. It's going to be a good time. You guys aren't going to want to miss it. But that's going to be it for me tonight, guys. Thank you so much for all of you guys who left a like and supported this thing. Be sure to study your Bible this week. Be sure to pray for one another, and we will be back on